Okay, that's fine. So, hi everyone. Good evening. Trust you had a good day. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. So thank you for joining us tonight on another exciting session, which is for this Bit Career Series 2025. If you can hear me clearly, kindly use your emoji to let me know that you can hear me and I am audible enough. So my name is Cindy. Okay, thank you. So my name is Cindy, and I will be hosting the session. Of course, we have our speaker here in the building, and we have a few other listeners that are going to be listening to the awesome conversations we are going to be holding tonight. Especially for those who are especially passionate about product design, tech teams, leadership, and just creating impact generally when it comes to designs. So of course the title of tonight's session is continuous design and development, lean and collaborative software delivery, where we'll be talking about a lot of things when it comes to design. So you will also hear some key thoughts and a lot of insights from the speaker tonight. And our speaker is James Cook. He's a design lead with over 18 years of experience in designing digital products across fintech, energy, government, and even more. So James himself has built in-house teams. He has worked with very interesting industries. He has practical insights to share on how design and development works, um, and everything about it generally. So we are very, very lucky to have him in the room. So I'm going to stop talking now and we'll just hand things over to James. So for the next 40 to 45 minutes, James will be giving us everything he has for us tonight on this session. So kindly take notes, kindly listen, settle in, and just enjoy the session. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay. Well, it's good evening from the UK, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. And a huge thank you to Veet for inviting me to this event. So my name is James. I'm from the UK. I live in a city called Bristol. And I'm a designer who helps organizations build great in-house teams and digital services. So I'm going to share some stories today about continuous and iterative design process. So let's just get started. There is actually a better name for this talk. Really, it should be How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Uncertainty, which is a little Doctor Strangelove reference for the film geeks in the audience. I'm speaking to you all today. This is a 21st century technologist audience, right? So where better place for us to start our story than ancient Egypt? So there is a very interesting story behind the evolution of the pyramids. The Egyptians ruled along the Nile for 3,500 years, and the royal tombs at Giza are only one of their many incredible achievements. But like most cultures, in the earliest days of their civilization, they would lay their dead to rest in very simple pit graves and burial mounds. So we might today call that afterlife management MVP, because it meets the need and it just gets the job done. But over time, these mounds became more structured and more planned, and they evolved into tombs that we know as mastabas. So these are simple mud brick structures with sloping sides. So they had iterated their design. And then almost 5,000 years ago, Pharaoh Djoser had a visionary high priest. His name is Imhotep. And just for historical accuracy, it's this guy and not this one. So to show Pharaoh's mighty power and to glorify him in the afterlife, Imhotep had developed the idea of stacking mastabas and then building in stone. This is the first time anyone had thought of this. So what you're seeing here is the step pyramid at Saqqara. This is the first Egyptian pyramid, and it's a prototype for all that followed. And so began the age of pyramids. Today we would call this innovation and quite possibly disruption. Decades later, the pharaoh Sneferu ordered a second pyramid. His engineers had experimented with its form, and they advanced from stepped to smooth sides. But this one collapsed before completion and it was abandoned, so it was a failed experiment. Sneferu commissioned another attempt to apply what they'd learnt, and during the construction they realised halfway up that the angle was too steep, and so they pivoted, very literally. So today it is affectionately known as the bent pyramid. But this is still functional and it served its purpose, and actually it's world famous today because of their response to changing requirements. And then Pharaoh Sneferu's team finally landed the design with the red pyramid. This was the world's first successfully completed true smooth-sided pyramid, and so third time lucky. So the Egyptians' process of build, measure, learn, that continued over many generations, and it culminated with the world's largest stone pyramid, which is the Great Pyramid of Giza that we know today. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it realized the design's full potential. And what I love about all of this is we can literally see the Egyptians' learning process captured right there in stone. Like, how wonderful is that? So Egyptian monuments developed by trial and error, actually. Their material remained the same throughout, and each new iteration improved their knowledge of its properties, its constraints, and its possibilities. And at the start of each successive pyramid, the Egyptians had their earlier structures to look back on. They were working prototypes which later versions could learn from, and all of this played out over centuries. So the tombs at Giza are masterpieces. They're the pinnacle of this design. The Egyptians had taken the design as far as it could go. Then, as time passed, the pyramid tradition declined. The pharaohs, were competing to build more and more ambitious monuments that led to over-engineering, and it became no longer feasible, nor celebrated, or affordable. This might sound familiar to the work we do today. Actually, we can liken this to what's called experience rot. As we add more features, we add complexity, which decreases the overall quality of the experience. Oh, sorry. Here we go. So as the Egyptians' needs changed and fresh thinking was desired, later pharaohs established a new graveyard in the Valley of the Kings. And this is a new design, it's a different approach, and it's actually an even more complex achievement than the pyramids. And we can see the influence of everything that came before, the stepped architecture, the angle of the ramps, the symbolism, even the way that they brought light inside of the building. So this design is the result of learning and adapting from trial and error with the pyramids. So actually, we don't get the Valley of the Kings without building the pyramids first. But you also cannot get to the Valley of the Kings by iterating a pyramid. So often when it's time to take a different approach, we have to make a creative leap. And there's a name for this. We call it designing through the local maximum. So when you start something from zero, as you see there on the diagram, you build it up, you iterate, and eventually you reach the pinnacle of that design direction. And then when those opportunities to start afresh come along, actually we don't start from square one, from zero again. We're starting from that dip in the middle of the diagram, and we build on everything that we've previously learned. That allows us to go further. So I think Johnny Ive actually captured this very nicely in this quote. At the end of a piece of work, we have the thing that we've made, but we also have everything that we've learned. It's because as a species, we learn as we create. So the Egyptians were working with atoms and matter, so their cost of change or their mistakes was actually very high. They had to work slowly, and their feedback loops spread out over lifetimes. But in digital today, we work with information at the speed of light. And so our cost of learning or change is actually very low. We can progress fast, and our feedback loops are in real time. So I often wonder then, why is it that when we set out on a new piece of work, we often decide what it will be at the end, at the beginning? Because when we start something, we know the least about what it is that we actually need to do. We learn as we progress. It's only when we reach the end that we know what it is we actually need to do. So design is a journey, and I think we should worry less about defining and designing all of our decisions up front when we know the least. And actually, the head of Google Chrome's developer experience once said, don't start by trying to optimize your solution. First, try to get the simplest possible design working. See how long that takes, and then learn from it. Because when we try to optimize early, we often get a solution that is too complicated and fragile, and that means a high cost of change. We often optimize the design for things that aren't needed, they aren't important, or they just aren't right. So what do the ancient Egyptians teach us about iteration? We don't get the Valley of the Kings, we don't get excellence without iterating your way to the pyramids first, without doing the slower work. Okay, so I'll bring us back to 2025. I call this animation the $500,000 GIF. This is what design waste in software delivery looks like. This GIF represents 6 months' effort of a designer from a global design agency. And every time that designer was asked to solve a problem, they'd open up their favorite design tool and they'd come up with something new. Every mock-up here is different, created from scratch, even though they were all meant for the same government service, the client. And none of the images in this GIF actually look like what we built in the end. So the mock-ups in that GIF, they don't represent making anything real or learning from it. And I see this a lot. There's a lot of waste in the work that we do. So that approach, it doesn't deliver any value to an organization, let alone the team doing the work or the end users that team serves. And if ideas never make it out of the design tool, what value do they really have? So when I first came across this many years ago, it really changed my thoughts on how we approach design in agile software delivery and the importance as designers of working in really lean and lightweight ways. And that's how we can minimize waste, which minimize costs, minimizes effort, and allows us to do more with the resources that we have. So I'm going to share a few stories with you. And the first one is going to be around how we collaboratively got to a solution as a team. So many years ago, I was working for the UK's higher education financing body. So this photo is their processing centre. They had 1,000 people employed to manually process student loan applications. And anything that was automated was basically done by macros in spreadsheets. So a lot of manual labour. The loan application that I was working on used a 16-page paper form, and that form had evolved over 20 years itself. When that processing centre received the paper form, they would scan it into their system, but they would still have to manually enter the data into their assessment tool. So they would have a scan on one side of the screen, and then they'd be typing into the form on the right. It was very painful. So understandably, the client wanted to digitize this process because their hypothesis was they could save money if they automate it. So the product team's brief was to validate in 6 weeks whether or not we should do a £5 million project to automate that process. Because there's a lot of money to spend and we didn't know if it would save money. So the first thing that the whole team did together was to get together and to spend a few days defining what needed to be done to answer this question: should we do the bigger project? We took a hypothesis-led approach and we created the wall that you're seeing on the photo here to guide us. So this wall is essentially a backlog. The leftmost vertical column are the hypotheses that we had. The horizontal is time. So the 6 weeks are the 6 pink sticky notes. And then the green cards are activities that the team would do to prove or disprove the hypotheses. You start with the things on the left first, and then as you move your way rightwards, you uncover more information. So our hope was to get as least far along this wall as possible, because the sooner we can answer the question, should we definitely do this work? Should we not do this work? Again, that's saving much time and money. So the question was, does it make sense to spend 5 million to automate this process? So we had a structured plan, and everyone in the team had contributed to that plan, understood what the plan was and why we were doing it that way, and they had bought into it. So one hypothesis that we were working with, that it was even possible to automatically process these loan applications and that it would be cost effective. There was a lot of risks that it might not be even possible. So within that hypothesis, there was a task that applied to me as the designer, which was to prototype the interface for a digital form. What would a digital form for this application look like? We had no idea what was needed, and we needed to start as soon as possible. The primary end users were internal staff, so this was a great opportunity to also involve them in the design process itself, because it's always better to design with people and not design at them. So we ran some ideas sessions with them, and we spent some time observing them in their day-to-day jobs, gathering their pain points, their preferences through direct observation. And actually, we rotated everyone in the product team through these sessions, not just the designers and the researchers. So it meant that everyone that was working on this project had first-hand experience of how bad the existing way of working was. And we were very fortunate to have a subject matter expert working directly with the team as well. We had wanted someone from the processing team who knew nothing about building software to sit with us every day and to participate in the team's decision-making process. So that subject matter expert, the business analyst and myself, we paired to do a content audit. Let's understand this paper form and see what data is collected. So we went through the form, we broke it down into its individual data points, and we structured it in a spreadsheet. There was a lot of discussion around what the data points were for, whether they were necessary, and any of the associated business logic. And then together we found inconsistencies and areas for improvement as we built the spreadsheet up. So we discussed really low-level details like what should be free text or what should be preset options. So from very early on in this project, the client, who was our subject matter expert, the development team, represented by the business analysts, and design, user-centered design, myself, all had this shared understanding of what it was we were working with, what our material was. The next thing we did was we turned the spreadsheet into a data model. So the subject matter expert, the business analyst, the tech lead, and myself, we spent half a day agreeing this. And this was really interesting because it not only informed the data model that the developers use for the database and the APIs, it also informed the information architecture, the form structure, and the data validation for the user experience. So again, both engineering and design are using the same resources to create their solutions. I iterated that first draft, and I used my design skills to tidy it up, to apply more structure, use color to communicate, add other metadata information to it. And then this stayed up on the wall for about a year because it was constantly used as a shared point of reference by everyone working on the project. And I do feel that we've lost something in our digitize all the things ways of working now. Obviously, there's a lot of advantages. But tangible artifacts on walls also create a common space for discussion. So I try to encourage teams to think, how can we replicate that experience with digital tools as well? The next thing we did was to run a series of co-design workshops with everyone in the product team, with the client stakeholders, and we brought in end users from the processing team. And I think this is interesting because as UX people, we often talk about validating our assumptions with people through prototypes and usability testing. And that's all good, but my problem with this is that it's always done after the solution has been designed. And so we're designing at people, and then we're asking them if they like or just can use what we've already decided. But we need to ask ourselves, how often do we invite the people that we're designing for into the design process itself? I would much rather hand a pen to the people I'm designing for and ask them, how would you solve it? And you don't always get usable ideas, but it's not about that. It's about giving them a sense of influence and ownership in the final solution, that they are the ones they will have to use. Because again, we should be designing with people, not at them. From these workshops, we got a bucket of ideas to work with, And this was without me ever having to apply my subjective opinions on what the interface could be, what the solution could be, what was appropriate. At the same time as this, I also challenged the subject matter expert I was working with to design their own dream version, no constraints. And after he was done protesting about not being a designer and not having the right tools, he came in the next day with this. So he had used the tool that he knew best, which was a spreadsheet, and you're looking at a wireframe created in Excel. And actually this client colleague was so excited to be working on this that they'd stayed up late overnight creating it, because no one had ever asked how they would solve the problems that his team faced. And this was a really eye-opening moment for me. And what was produced here was actually really useful in understanding more about the information hierarchy and the relationship between the data. So during this project, I began to understand that my role as a designer is not to do the design. Actually, my job is to facilitate and to ensure that good quality design gets done, but from wherever it comes from. So now I had, at this point in the project, I began to review everything we'd collected and generated. I would weed out the noise, pick the strongest ideas, bring it all together, and sketch the direction that we'd go in. Still, without any formal design from me, we had the foundations of what we needed to build. We understood the data, we had a structure, and we had interface concept ideas. So this was the very first wireframe, and it is sketched by hand because I actually still think that's faster, and it's certainly less locked in than digital tools. We're only about 30% complete here, so I want to use a 30% fidelity to make that really clear to anyone I show it to. And actually, I like to use mobile first as an intentional constraint, because when you only have a single column for an interface, for a layout, it really forces you to focus on hierarchy and priority. What must go at the top, what's the most important, and what goes at the bottom. Is it a call to action, or is the reading order logical, or is it something different? What choices and trade-offs do I have to make with only a linear order? First feedback I always tend to seek is actually from developers. I like to get their opinion on what's feasible or cost effective first. Is this interface concept quick, easy, and cheap to build? Or have I got something that's too complex, which would take a lot of time? In this case, how could the form itself capture semantic information that would make automatic processing easier? So our front-end developer had HTML knowledge that I didn't, so we did a design review together. And then after refining, based on that developer feedback, it's only then I went to my design and product colleagues to seek their feedback. Again, I told them that this was 30% completed, so I needed 30% feedback. What are your first impressions? Does it make sense? Does it meet the business goals? Is the basic usability there? 90% feedback, things like colors and typos and interactions, can wait till later. I always want to keep my cost of change as low as possible. So bare bones basics like this allow that. If I'd gone straight to high fidelity and high complexity earlier, it just means it would take me longer to iterate when I got feedback. So because our developers were busy working on other hypotheses, I actually hacked together a very simple prototype in HTML. This was very rough, but I wanted something with working form fields and something which I could run in the browser so I could do as realistic testing as possible. And then by translating the design into code myself, or today, you could vibe code it in a fraction of the time, I not only learned more about how HTML and CSS worked itself, but actually I uncovered weaknesses in the design that I hadn't realized, so I was able to iterate it as I was coding it. I tried something new in my design process on this project, and I had intentionally wanted to test something this raw with end users. I wanted to make zero assumptions and see what happened if we gave them the most simple thing we possibly could. And actually, I got very granular feedback on things like jargon language, the order of the form elements, grouping of similar inputs, things that are critical for creating a rock-solid foundation to build upon, but otherwise might have been missed. And this happened so much that I began to ask people why they were commenting on these very, very low-level details. And they told me that what they were seeing on the screen here was clearly a work in progress, and therefore it was okay to criticize it. And one person really spelled it out to me. He made the point that when you see high fidelity work, things that are really polished, clearly someone has put a lot of time and effort into that. So you're actually much less likely to criticize it because it appears done. And this, I learned this 12 years ago, but this completely rewired my brain, that we can actually use psychology here to influence the type of feedback that we get. So over a week, we ran rapid usability testing sessions with our internal end users. And then between sessions, we'd quickly hack changes to the prototype based on what we'd learned in the previous tests. And in the next session, we see if the problem went away or needed more thinking. Testing on something this basic, we actually observed their default behavior and comments, not influenced by complex design decisions that we had pre-made for them. And so with each round of testing and feedback, the thing organically evolved itself and the design was self-emerging. So at no point did I decide this is how it would end up. Even though this is still very plain, every single design decision could be tied back to an observed piece of evidence. So as an example, I never thought to myself, I'll try adding a sticky navigation on the right-hand side. That idea came as a result of watching people scroll up and down a very, very long page and then ask for a better way to navigate around it. And that's actually very crucial. I could have guessed in advance that scrolling up and down is going to be a pain, of course. And I could have made the decision to break the page up into a wizard or to use an accordion pattern, but that would have been an assumption that I made. And if I'd done that, if I'd not been comfortable with testing on something so basic and actually letting the solution break during testing, what I would have missed is that most people commented how good it was that all the information was available in a single view. They didn't have that in their existing system. Their existing process meant they had to jump between multiple applications and different screens, constantly cross-referencing information, and it was very time-consuming. So for everything to be here in one place was a vast improvement. All they needed was a way to jump between sections faster. And I'm even proud to say that the sticky navigation wasn't even my idea. It was suggested by a test participant, which I think is the best place for ideas to come from. So again, it's designer as facilitator. Okay, so that's how we evolved a solution concept with high collaboration and tight feedback loops. Now let's look at a specific piece of functionality, and the story will be a little bit shorter. So this was for the same client as the last story, but it's a different project. So here we needed to build a new national database of all of the UK's higher education courses. And a key part of a course is the academic year, which in its simplest form is 3 terms and 3 years. So 3 terms per year for 3 years. And it does get more complicated from there. So we actually knew that this would be a complex piece of work and there'd be lots of edge cases that we needed to do to support. But to ensure that I wasn't blocking the developers, all that mattered at the start was getting the basics right, and then we would build up and iterate from there. So once we'd understood a little bit about the shape of the data, and we did some rapid ideation as a team, we came up with the fastest thing we could build. So this is not a good user experience, but it's the cheapest, quickest thing we could create in code. In this case, it was a structured form, using only select menus to represent the individual parts of a date. It was the minimal amount of development effort the team could do, and then saved us time on having to think through more complex interactions. Select menus are a default part of the web, so you essentially get them for free. So the UK government digital service, they actually echo that quote from earlier from the Chrome developer experience team. First, just make it work. So our first draft date input followed this principle, and this is what was built. It's very ugly, and it's very far from usable, but it was functional. This is in real code working in a staging environment. So it allowed us to capture structured data with almost zero user input error, because as long as you entered all the dates, no other validation was required because you can't enter incorrect data from a select menu. And this gave us a few advantages. It was cheap and fast to make, and we could test with real data, which is always good. There was minimal business logic or input validation required. And then we could begin to learn things as quickly as possible by observing people doing things long form. What suggestions would our users make to speed this up? And actually, I learned afterwards, what you're seeing here wasn't very different from the existing system people were already using. So actually it helped build empathy within the product team because they had to suffer through filling out this form during testing as much as our end users did. Another thing to consider is if we'd stopped the work here because something different was prioritized for the team to work on, we got this far and no further, at least people would be able to use this and they could input dates and complete their task. And this is a really key part of the Agile Manifesto, the principle of working software over comprehensive documentation. If I'd spent my time designing the perfect possible interface in my design tool, it would all be documented there, but never built. And that means then when the team's work is reprioritized, our end users would have received nothing because it would have never left my design tool. So think back to that $500,000 gift that we saw earlier. So what we had was a walking skeleton. It's the bare minimum that we needed, but which it gives us a scaffolding to hold everything else off later. So now we've got it working. First, make it work. Next, we make it work better, one iteration at a time. So while our developers were building out that first pass, that gave me free time to go away and do what designers do. Go look for inspiration, talk to some people, have a think, do some sketching, explore better ideas, but without blocking the delivery or allowing progress to be made. So we went from this to this, just using layout and presentation to improve the usability. It's still all the select menus. But all the time we're starting to run usability testing as well and using that input to inform the new solution. And one thing we learned was actually how well our end users knew the dates. Unlike, say, a flight, when you're booking a flight, we get a calendar picker, right? You may not know the date that you want to fly. You just know that you want to go on Saturday. And so a visual date picker is the best pattern to use. But the dates here, and in other cases, are more like birthdays. So our users knew the dates they would be working with each year off by heart, because each year a set of dates were chosen for academic terms and then they were used for all courses at an institution. So if you now think how fast you can type your birthday and how annoying it is when you have to enter your birthday using a calendar picker and it's much slower. So it was much quicker to type the dates in, so we made that change. If I designed this solution up front, it's very likely I would have chosen the calendar picker pattern because that's how we capture dates, right? But by holding back that decision, I created space for the team to learn from our end users what would actually be the best way of capturing the dates, let them show us. So as we added more business logic and validation, we then moved to single inputs for each date. And this is what we iterated to. And again, this is working software, not a prototype. And you can see as the GIF goes around here, as I type in 99ZZ99, the component does the rest of the work. We also added extra functionality like remembering last dates, clearing dates, entering date variants, all based on the feedback received when usability testing that basic version. And I'm completely convinced that if we tried to jump straight to designing something as complex as this at the start, when we knew the least about what we need to do, there's no way we would have ended up with something as elegant as the solution that we ended up with. And we received some quite nice feedback on it as well. So Jeff Patton is a product person who created the user story mapping method. And he likes to remind us, it ain't iteration if you only do it once. Iteration isn't about recovering from failure, it's about learning from doing. So we should design our workflows so that we intend to iterate. And I'm going to give you a quick second story about dates. So this is a completely different team, different client, building a visa system. And the journey needed to capture a visa's cancellation date that would happen in the next 7 days. Everyone on the team jumped to using a calendar picker. It's a date, so obviously it's a calendar picker. But because of what I'd learned a few years before from the last story, I suggested that we kept things simple to start with. Even if the answer was a calendar picker, jumping straight to a complex widget like that would likely end us tying us into it. And I wanted to get the underlying data model correct first. So same approach, use select menus, just capture the date. Now, during the story demo for this functionality, the whole team was discussing ways that we can iterate and reduce the amount of user input required. There was a suggestion to make only the changeable parts of the date and input, like you're seeing on the screen here. So that would create a new problem. Like, what if the end of the month and you'd have to make the next month selectable? It would just create lots of unnecessary business logic. So that was not a good idea. But then a very quiet voice spoke up from the back and said, "You can only select a date in the next 7 days, right?" Yes. So why not just have a single select menu with only those 7 dates in it? Like this. This was genius. So in that moment, this was me. The best solution had not come from me, the designer. It had come from a really introverted developer who often said he didn't know anything about design, but yet he had felt his opinions were valued enough in the team to at least offer a suggestion. So I really began to understand that my role as a designer wasn't to do the design. Remember this idea of designer as facilitator? It's for me to enable design to happen wherever it comes from. Okay, last story now. I want to show you how we've used this approach for the finer details too as well. Aesthetics, layout, brand identity. It's not just the functionality side of things. So we're in another project now. The team had come out of a 6-week program kickoff, and this was the only design asset that I had created. It's called a sketch flow. There's a little bit of information architecture here. There's a basic user journey. There's thumbnails of what the interface might be. This is a 10,000 foot view, and it's just enough to get us going. We had about 15 months worth of scope and only 9 months to do it in, with a hard deadline. So this looks very simple, but actually many people had contributed to this over the 6 weeks and had agreed that it all made sense. So we had that shared understanding of what we were doing. And this was placed on a whiteboard where everybody in the company could view it and ask about it, give feedback, make suggestions. So we took the same approach that you're now familiar with, a laser focus on task completion using just a very, very basic web interface. It evolved over time as we added more functionality until we got here. Now, it's a bit ugly. It's what's known as a camel, which is a horse which is designed by committee. Each individual part of this interface makes sense, but together they're a bit of a mess, right? They don't hang together. But this was okay because we had focused on building a system fit for purpose first, and the look and feel, despite what many designers will tell you, is actually less important. But you remember the local maximum? So everyone agreed that this interface design solution wasn't fit for purpose. Was fit for purpose, but it just wasn't much to look at. It wasn't appealing. And early on in a delivery, this doesn't really matter. When you're at that 30% completion, it can look 30% good. But here now with this screenshot, we're actually at 90% completion. So we need to do 90% finer details. So we agreed that 2 weeks before our go live, we would put the designer and a developer aside in order to tighten up the interface. We captured this work in our backlog to ensure the work got done. But because we've been working on this for 8 months, we knew exactly what the quick wins would be, where the bits that really needed attention were, and we've been collecting interface design ideas alongside building the system. So very, very quickly, in a week, the designer, a front-end developer, and the product owner paired, and they got it to this. So we not only improved the navigation and the interface structure, but we aligned it to the brand identity as well. It's much nicer. I love this quote. "We make the road by walking. The way we really learn is to start something and then learn as you go along." And we've got to remember that mistakes are actually not dead ends. They are steps towards unforeseen discoveries and innovation. A design process without mistakes is a design process without learning, actually. Trial and error is how we learn, and it's how we improve and grow. We learn the most through failure because it forces us to try different things and to refine our approach. If we design everything up front, without allowing others the opportunity to define the solution, we lose those opportunities for serendipity and happy accidents before we get to the end. And that's often where our best work comes from. Or put another way, we don't make progress by getting things right. We make progress by getting things wrong in an interesting way and then learning something. Okay, I'm going to share a few ideas with you just before we wrap up. So idea number 1 is we should all be collaborating a lot more. So here we see a business analyst and a quality analyst doing primary research, because user research should be a team sport, right? UXs, UX designers, product designers, user researchers, we should spend our time training our teams to do simple research because it opens research out and it builds better empathy than just reporting back what somebody else has learned. Here we see a usability testing session. The whole team is involved in capturing observations, discussing the insights, and then coming up with ways to solve the problems that they've seen somebody suffer with. Here, another team is reviewing their usability testing notes from the day before. They're looking for the findings together, and then they're prioritizing them together. The day after this photo, everyone sketched their solutions together, and the changes were released to their end users by the end of that same week. So on Monday they did testing, on Friday they released the updates. It was amazing. Instead of having designers mock up high fidelity pictures of what a solution might be in the future, I prefer to run whiteboard sessions where everyone in the team contributes and they discuss and they critique each other's ideas. Then they together decide what solution they want to build. And often these ideas can go straight into code without the hassle of design handoff because the developers were in all the conversations and know what the intent is. This is a business analyst who sketched a wireframe for a user story. No UXer required. So for me, the more I can upskill others in my team to do this stuff, to keep the work flowing smoothly, the more it frees me up to tackle larger problems like conducting discovery research or preparing for the next phase of work. This is the team's all hands story demo. Everyone had a say in whether the work was complete and if it was good enough to release to users. They would also go to the kickoff of every user story too. So even if you weren't working on the user story, everyone knew what work was in progress. Here we needed to respond to a new requirement quickly. So my friend Rob here was able to turn my scribble into code in like an hour. It'd be even quicker today, of course. But there was a design system in place so you could stitch something together quickly. So I didn't need to do a mock-up. We could then discuss that walking skeleton in live code and decide where to iterate together. And for me, this is the gold standard of cross-functional working that I always try to aim for. So another great example here. This is a graphic designer and a front-end developer pairing on responsive typography and jointly making decisions in the browser of how they wanted it to be. So there's no designer working solo in their own tool, having to create handover documentation, the developer working solo in their tool, clearly missing some of the details, not quite getting it right, and then not knowing the final result until the end of this linear process. They designed together and they decided together. This is what a team produced when deciding what to do for the next 6 weeks. They had decided it together. The designer on this team facilitated the workshop rather than designing the solution just to hand to the team. Idea 2, visualize more. And I do mean physically, like in real life. Tangible artifacts can be so much more meaningful and engaging than than digital ones. I find that really lightweight artifacts like this are often enough just to convey my intent. They're actually a lot quicker than creating in software usually, and they give people a picture of where we're heading without taking lots of time to document every detail. This thing is called a crib sheet. When I'm embedded in a delivery team, I will create one of these per user story, and it creates all the relevant information for the user story's outcome, but without over-specifying the solution before the people who are building it get to it. Those decisions get made together while the story is actually being worked on. Here we see a whiteboard after a 2-hour discussion between design, development, and product about responsive design. Instead of just saying, we have a mobile, a tablet, and a desktop, they were having an in-depth discussion about what it means for any width of viewport and identifying the patterns of how the interface will adjust. And they were able to do that in relation to their content. As a designer, I always make a point to visualize a team's delivery plan and to write in plain language what we're intending to achieve, and then sketching to show how that solution will build up. So you can see in the timeline there, as we go through the different phases that we predicted of the project, how the complexity of the interface builds up over time. And I like to find ways to visualize research and insights permanently in the team's space. And, again, these are walls. It can be in digital spaces as well. But what I'm aiming for is to have this information always in line of sight and always on people's minds, and it has to be updated regularly. This is harder in our post-COVID ways of working, but where it is possible, I find it creates a great focus point for discussion. When structuring and managing our work, it's my belief that a pile of tickets sitting in an online bucket up in the cloud, it just doesn't have the impact as visually structuring the work to be done. Again, analog on a wall or digital in Miro or somewhere else, right? I like to track the team's progress visually and show, actually, we are progressing through what we've said we're going to do. Again, post-COVID, perhaps paper on a wall doesn't work for all teams, but we can still visualize our backlog in Miro or other tools and then cross-link it to the system you use for your user stories. As designers, we have a lot of skills that can be used to help teams beyond just researching and designing the solutions. Another thought, stand-ups and team walls aren't meant to just be used for tracking software engineering work, development work. We can use them to show the progress of research, design-specific work, and UX depth. It's just as important that we make the work that we do visible as what our developers are working on. Again, this is a physical wall. You can do this digitally as well. And then idea number 3, worry less and embrace the uncertainty. So this GIF is what I like to show people to help them embrace uncertainty. It represents 3 months of building a new front-end app from start to finish. So there was never any mock-ups for this work. Every design decision was made only a few days before it went into development, and often as the work actually was in progress. When we started this project, it took 2 whole weeks just to get the content out of the database and available on a public URL on the internet because of the legacy technology that was involved. We weren't expecting that. So if we'd committed our scope to exactly the time we had available, and if I'd mocked up everything pixel perfect, we would have missed our deadline. But instead, we were able to change our scope to adapt for the 2 weeks that we've just lost. So as the GIF rotates around, you'll see after a few iterations, the blue banner comes in at the top. At that moment was when we linked to this new version from the old version and invited our users to come and kick the tires on it and to leave feedback. And you'll see it's very, very plain. It should be about now. Come on, there we go. Right, there's not even a logo. Right, it's just nicely formatted content. The feedback was largely negative at the beginning, as you'd expect, but it was also valuable. And over time, more and more of the feedback became positive because we were changing our work in direct response to what our visitors were telling us in real time. So this is what design in real time looks like. But you do have to trust that you'll get there. You'll get to a good enough solution. And by letting go of our desire for control and certainty, actually, we usually do. So if you remember that $500,000 waste GIF at the start, in that delivery, in that project, the expectation had been set that no work could begin without being fully spec'd in mockups first. And I had to push for a long time to do a piece of work where we didn't have mockups, to trust the team and that we would learn what we needed to do as we went along. When we finally got permission to do a 10-week piece of work as I wanted, I kept a record of how that solution kept about us through screenshots. It was the first time I created one of these GIFs, and I showed that animation to the stakeholders at the end. And actually, the product manager said to me, if only you'd shown me this in the beginning, I'd have understood what you wanted to do. And I realized then that design mock-ups, specifying everything up front, high fidelity, pixel pushing, all of it is about reassurance. People ask for static pictures of what the end result will be because they want to sign off, because they want to know what the end result will be good enough. So I started this talk with a promise to show how I learned to stop worrying and love the uncertainty. I've had to learn how to let go of control, how to trust in a methodical, objective, repeatable process, and how to embrace not knowing what it'll be like at the end, but knowing that we'll get there. This approach works best when your team, your process, and even your users are aligned around iteration, knowing that you'll keep working on the thing in real time until you're happy with it, or until something more important comes along. The Agile Manifesto tells us working software is the primary measure of progress. So our idea is actually not fully formed until it's shipped, until it's working software. At any time, a team's priorities can change. We've all experienced that. If the thing cannot be shipped because it's not finished yet, that is then what leads to waste. So I think this quote best captures what I've learned. Get comfortable with uncertainty and embrace failure. Optimize for being wrong and know how to adapt fast. It's not just that we shouldn't have an outcome to aim for, just don't let it dictate your approach. So, in summary, a few takeaways for you. Design with people, not at them. Build the simplest solution first and fast. Think of disciplines as specialities rather than specific roles. Shared kickoffs and sign-offs get everyone on the same page. Design should be a proposal rather than a contract. Continuous delivery is actually liberating, even for designers. Gradual rollouts reduce risk, and goals are better than plans. Thank you all very much for your time. I can stay for a while, Cindy, so I will hand back over to you for any Q&A.
I would want insight on navigating the tension between research and even limitations like that. That's number one. Then the other one is like receiving suggestions from developers, right? That seems quite easier for them to implement. But you on the design part, you feel that this is not the best experience. So we are asked to collaborate with everyone on the team. How are we supposed to manage this type of suggestions and also be able to maintain a balance between technical visibility and even your design integrity? What are the strategies you can use to involve other type of stakeholders like your engineers, your PMs in the design process as you have advised, and still ensure that your UX is still a priority? So thank you.
Okay, thank you for some huge questions, Foluto. I could speak maybe for half an hour on this, so certainly if you'd like to have a follow-up conversation after the call in more detail, we can do. Reach out to me.
Okay.
Maybe I'll start with the second question. So, how to manage? Did I understand correctly? How to manage feedback that you're receiving from your developers?
Yes, please, and even PMs or even your CEO, your CEOs.
Sure. Felicia, do you have any technical knowledge yourself about how the web or mobile applications work? Do you understand that side of things?
And not so much, but I can figure some things out, but not
Okay.
in the entire picture.
The reason I asked that, I'll just give the web as an example, right? The web is now, what is it, 35 years old. And there are really well-established patterns, particularly around the basic web elements, buttons and hyperlinks and headings. So I often find that actually developers, because they understand how they can build something cheaply, just using those default web elements, actually they're a good source of information of like, hey, here's how we can do the flow or build the form or create the web page, the content page in the simplest form. They have knowledge that we as designers don't have. What I have often seen in my career, and I have done myself in my early career, is because in Figma we can arrange pixels however we want, right? There's no constraints in Figma. We can come up with really crazy, wild, and maybe even good ideas. But if that good idea is going to cost, $1 million and 6 months to implement, whereas we could achieve the same outcome in 1 week for $1,000, for me, that cheap solution is always better because it means it's more likely to be made real, right? So in terms of feedback from developers or product managers or whoever else, I always try to welcome that feedback. I don't promise that I will act upon it, but I always try to invite it because I want them to feel that they have a say in the solution that we're all working on. But I think that maybe ties into your first question is, when you're a UX or a design team of one, a UX team of one, how do you prioritize everything you need to do? And then how do you make space for iterations? So I've got two answers for you here. A technique that I have learned is when it comes to prioritization or, the team is always wanting more and more and more work, I force them to prioritize. I say, right now, I am working on this task, whatever the task is. If you want me to stop doing that and work on something else, or to do 3 things at once, I can do that, but you have to understand that the quality will lower, right? You can have fast, you can have cheap, and you can have good, but you can only ever have 2. You can't have all 3. And so I make those people that are putting pressure on me make the decision, and I make sure it's written down. James, I want you to stop doing user research because I want you to do fast, low quality interaction design so that we can ship a feature. And actually, I've been doing this for 20 years now. I'm quite comfortable with that. And some people will say, oh, but it's our job to make sure the user experience is the best it can be. Yes, but that really it's a bit of a myth. that only really happens when you have a well-formed, functioning team where everything is in balance, right? The developers, the business, and user-centered design are in balance and everyone respects each other. But in the situation that you're describing, where there's just pressure, we just want Figma mockups, we don't care about the user experience, we don't care about quality, I say, okay, I'm not going to stress myself out about that. If you want lower quality, you can have lower quality. I will work faster. I will do less detail. And so I put the ownership of that prioritization decision on others. And I say, do you want me to do the thing I'm doing right now because I think that's the most important thing? Or do you want me to work on the other 99 things on your list? And actually, I find that when I stand my ground and push back like that, very often the people go away or they begin to understand that we can't just do everything, at perfect quality. So that's how I manage prioritization. The other part of your question was when you've got to handle everything, iterations itself. So I'll make some assumptions, but imagine you've got a month of time, right? So here's our timeline. You get your brief. You have to deliver something by the deadline. You might do some research, some discovery, like whatever it is. You'll probably spend quite a lot of time in Figma creating all these perfect mock-ups, right? So you're going to go through that month. Even if you're working quickly, you're going to go through a linear process and then you're going to get to one solution at the end. And you're going to hope that your client or your team or your users are happy with what you get. What I'm saying is we can change that process. Instead of taking a month to get to a solution, we can take a week to get to a solution because we're not going to create mockups or we're going to prototype straight in the app or into live code or we can vibe code now, whatever it might be. So actually you can get to something that is a functional solution in a quarter of the time. That means if you need to iterate, you've still got 3 weeks to go, right? But I often find you don't need to iterate. Whether you create something that's super basic like the screenshots I showed, or you work on an existing product and you have a design system and actually, things are at a higher fidelity, but they can just go straight into production. So again, I don't know enough about your situation, but you can think about maybe you can keep a diary or you can map out your own design process and then you can use that to reflect, okay, where am I spending quite a long time before I'm getting to something that I can show or I can test or I can release and see whether you can slim down that process. I'll stop there because, I could talk for a long time about this in more detail. If you'd like to have a follow-up conversation, then please reach out to me and maybe we can go into specific examples.
Okay, thank you very much, James. I'll reach out.
No worries.
Okay. Thank you, Felicia, for the question. So I hope he gave you the perfect response to your question. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And please look out for every other beat sessions that we are going to be having after this. Thank you so much, James. We are looking forward to have you for other sessions apart from this. So thank you, everyone. Have a very, very good night. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you very
everyone.
much for attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.